like to introduce myself. My name is Nicolette Karst. I work as an educational developer at Mid Sweden University, where I teach educational courses to the teachers about teaching and learning in higher education. I also have courses and workshops in how to use video in higher education. Let's see, the program for today, there's a thought behind this. We have 3 different presentations, and the first one will be on a more general level. The second one will focus on generative AI's impact on inclusive learning communities, and the third one is diving into building digital accessibility tools. Let's see. The first presentation is going to be given by, I have to go forward, Iain Johnston and Rina de Vries, both from the University of Groningen. Iain Johnston is an educational advisor at the University of Groningen. He is currently working on a student well-being plan aimed at improving inclusive teaching at the university. Rina de Vries is an educational developer and intercultural trainer at the University of Groningen. And together with a small team, they've developed the award-winning e-learning course, The Inclusive Teacher. I will be presenting our next speakers before they start their presentation. And we'll have a setup that we do the presentations first. And in the end, we'll have more like a panel discussion where we address the questions that you will be writing in the chat. Okay, take it away, Iain and Rina.
Okay, I'll share my screen then, because Iain and I are both in our presentation. So Okay, can you see this okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, welcome to this presentation by Iain and myself. As Nicolette just said, we both work at the University of Groningen in various capacities. But one thing we've worked on together is the Inclusive Teacher e-learning course. And we're going to talk about how to make course materials accessible. It will be like a sneak preview of the entire course, as it were, so because it's quite a big topic. Okay, so the Inclusive Teacher, it's a course we built in our LMS, and it is meant for teachers, so they can do the e-learning at their own pace. It offers some training, but also hands-on tools, so we wanted to be quite practical in approach. The idea was to promote awareness of the importance of diversity and inclusion in teaching. To us, good teaching is inclusive teaching. So some teachers think it's an extra or an add-on, but we also try to show in the course that teachers also have probably many skills already. There's much they do already, but we hope to help them to build on that and to make their teaching even more inclusive by showing them practical, as I already mentioned, tools, so practical steps. So small things that can make adjustment that are achievable, attainable, also for the teachers themselves. So it's not about starting from scratch or doing everything anew. We want teachers to recognize I do a lot already, and now how can I make my teaching even more inclusive? The way we developed content, we talk to teachers and we talk to students to begin with. So we asked the teachers, what kind of training would you need? And we asked the students, what do you need from your teachers? So, and we also spoke to a lot of D&I experts across the university. At the University of Groningen, most faculties have a designated D&I officer, and they advised us on what to include, what to leave out. The teacher said, look, if you don't show that you've done your research on this, we won't believe you. So we studied the literature quite extensively. And we also give citations. So it's not as if people have to read an academic article. That's not the feel we wanted. But we do show that, yes, we have the background knowledge to present all this. And we consulted special interest organisations. Iain and I both have a background of either coming from or working in the UK. And there's ECO in the Netherlands, which is the Expertise Centre for Inclusive Education. And we're very proud to say that they have an annual inclusion award, and we got the jury prize for our course this year. So that was really good. So it shows that we've done our work. Okay. In our course, we take a multidimensional view of diversity. In our view, diversity is not fixed, it's intersectional. It's not just about what you often hear people say, oh, yes, different nationalities and gender. It's far more than that. So this is a nice way of presenting that. It's Garner, Schwartz and Rowe. There are different things going on. Students might be parents, a student might have a different educational background, so being used, or they might have certain physical impairments or anything. So, and this is something we really want to explain in our course. It's not just about gender and doing the quick fixes. So inclusive group work, okay, we mix the females and males, and maybe we think about this a bit, but we say it's much richer and more varied than that. What we did when designing the course, we have 5 units in the course. The separation into units is slightly artificial because we wanted to offer people, teachers, most teachers are very busy, and we want to offer so doable 2-hour units. It starts with an introduction, which is background, what is inclusive teaching, what does diversity mean to you? So it's not as if we know all, it's not us saying this is right, this is wrong. We want people to think about, how do I see this? And then we separate it into inclusive course design, pedagogy, group work, and assessment. And as I said, it's slightly artificial because course design involves thinking about assessment, of course. But I think it works. So the feedback was quite positive. Okay, we'll concentrate on inclusive course design, as I said, and Iain will start with to talk about that.
Thanks, Rina. So I'll start off by saying a few things about the universal design for learning, since that underpins our course design principles. So next slide, please, Rina. Yep. So universal design for learning, which some of you may be familiar with, UDL, is a good starting point for inclusive course design because it provides inclusive principles, techniques, and practical steps related to teaching. Sometimes teachers have said to us that the word universal in UDL can make this approach sound daunting, or seems to imply that it would require a complete overhaul of what they're doing. But as Rina said, often without realizing it, most teachers are already applying some UDL techniques in their everyday practice, and inclusive teaching is good teaching and vice versa. And you can see forms of universal design in physical spaces. Indeed, the concept partly began in architecture. So the wheelchair ramp, which we have pictured here, for example, and likewise automatic sliding doors benefit not only people with mobility issues, but also those carrying large items like luggage, in addition to lowering the spread of viruses by removing the need for other people to touch the door. So it's all about intentional design that fits diverse needs, but with benefits for everyone. And then in its broadest sense, the UDL approach reflects the move from a medical model of inclusivity, that is responding to diverse student needs only when certain barriers are encountered, to a social model attempting to remove potential barriers through anticipatory course design. So UDL encourages the removal of as many barriers to learning as possible through intentional and proactive inclusive design, whether students disclose personal circumstances or not. And in the Dutch system, it is up to students to disclose personal information on every new course that they take at university, which is different, I know, to other countries, but perhaps makes it extra important here that we are anticipatory in the way that we design. So next slide, please. So UDL begins with a straightforward proposition relevant to all inclusive course design, and that there is no average learner. Instead, each student brings a unique combination of background, interests, and skills to the classroom. And to accommodate this diversity, UDL promotes the use of flexible teaching strategies and accessible materials, to which we'll return a bit later, to meet the diverse learning needs of all students. And on the slide here, we have the three main principles. So there's the multiple means of engagement, or sometimes the why of learning, which underscores the need for learners to be motivated and to know the purpose of their learning. And you can also think of this as enhancing enthusiasm for learning. Then there's the multiple means of representation, sometimes the what of learning, which promotes consideration of how information is provided and the ways that students actually encounter it. We might also think of this as the knowledge for learning. And then finally, the multiple means of action and expression, which sometimes is the how, supporting students in becoming goal-oriented and strategic learners. So we think of this as the skills for learning. When we take these things together, we can see also that UDL is not really a separate or a radically new approach to teaching. In designing courses, teachers normally have already thought about many of these aspects. For example, in educational support at Groningen, we often hear teachers want to build more community among students to increase motivation and engagement in class. And unsurprisingly, fostering collaboration and community is a UDL method. So next slide, Rina. So the full set of guidelines for the UDL available at the Karst website, 38 methods or checkpoints, all of which have hyperlinks on the card itself, with further explanations and links to educational research to support them. We always say to teachers, this looks really overwhelming to begin. It's a lot of information, but this is more like a menu card of options, and to keep in mind that most teachers are already doing some of these things, and not every method is applicable to every teaching context or moment. So the card, if you've not seen it before, is worth exploring in your own time for that reason. Next slide, Rina. And to finish this section, then, we stress that often in course design, evolution is preferable to revolution. So adding something new from UDL every time a course runs allows you to see what effect a change has and quickly adds up to a more inclusive course. And we really believe, as Rina said, in co-creation with students and with colleagues wherever possible. So this means asking students, what do you need? This can give you a starting point, and likewise with colleagues, what worked for you, what works for them, and where and when are your opportunities to share best practice with one another. So yeah, that's UDL. Rina, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, okay. So another section of the unit, Inclusive Course Design, is about diversifying course materials. You can see some quotes here from the student focus groups we held. And what they said is that sometimes certain groups of learners are not reflected in the curriculum at all, or it's just because it could be just Western perspectives that are being presented. That means that students don't feel represented and maybe can't really engage with the material. So is this about me? Is this for me? That can be a bit unclear. But also the student said, and I thought that was a very astute remark, so that way you don't develop a critical mindset because you only look at things from one perspective. So, and then the present bias or the view of the majority is only strengthened, perpetuated, so that's not a good thing. They also pointed out some international students, what we encounter is many Western examples, often Dutch examples, but how is that of use to me when I go back to my country? So how does that prepare me for my employment situation later? So, and again, they said, here's a quote, non-Dutch students can feel unseen, erased, maybe also de-skilled because teachers don't build on what these students bring to the classroom. So but they build on people with a Dutch educational background. So it's important for student representation that students feel that they belong, that it's also about them, for them, and as a result, whether they will engage with the material. But it's also about not having a one-sided view or being presented with a one-sided view, but integrated knowledge, develop critical thinking, and the argument of employability. Okay, so if you look at course materials, we say look at it through the prism of diversity. And in our course, we present a number of prompts. So you could look at it, for instance, do you only have authors from a certain country, part of the world on your reading list? So, or look at the images you present. Other different level, is a scientist always a he in your course? I mean, things like that. There's things to think about. And if you look at it from that perspective, there are ways of diversifying the curriculum. Again, I think also our students, one of the teachers we interviewed said, I just asked the students what's missing. So it's a very good starting point. Having said that, there's also certain limits to what you can do. Sorry to be to disappoint you, but what people sometimes do, they look at authors' names and think that must be someone from the global south, judging by the name. But the name is not always a good indicator, is it? And also, being from the global south, does that mean that people were born there, educated there, published there? So that's a bit of a slippery slope. And it can also lead to like tokenism, so that one or two authors are added to the list, and then, oh, because it's a female, I only have male authors, I'm putting a female on the reading list. But that could even send off the signal like this is really an exception. So do you see what I mean? So there are certain limits. And sometimes maybe you can't find a female of color who produced brilliant research in a certain field because females of color traditionally had less easy access to academia. So the authors could simply not be there. In a way, the curricula we have, they are cultural artifacts. So we inherited it over the years. But you can make changes, or as a first step, indicate to your students in a sort of diversity statement in your syllabus, I'm aware of the limits of what I'm presenting to you. And then maybe enter into discussion with the students, how can I diversify? So this is, you could say this course is about Danish culture in the 17th century. So it's very clear. So this is the context within which we operate. If you say it's about chemistry, as the chemistry teacher we interviewed said, I said, I'm aware that there are, this textbook is very Western oriented, mostly male authors. Do you have maybe different role models you can come up with? And the students did, and that was really good. So the students helped him to diversify his curriculum. Okay, so this is a bit about diversifying the curriculum. So why it's important, but also certain limits, but how you can work towards that. But I recommend first taking a look at your materials and see, oh, maybe I can make a few changes. Okay, Iain will talk about digital accessibility now.
Yeah, briefly to wrap up our talk, and we'll look at digital accessibility. So at Groningen, we have a working group on digital accessibility that Rina and I have been part of, and this working group produced our digital accessibility quick guide. And in that, we start with a simple principle, which is that we want our digital content to be suitable for everyone who studies with us. So in the guide, we highlight what is legally expected of us as a higher education institution in the Netherlands around digital accessibility, as well as indicating extra advice on how to enhance accessibility and even further beyond those guidelines. Next slide, please, Rina. So some of the tips here you may be familiar with, covering the basics. So short paragraphs, consistent layout, icons and visuals to support text, combining options for engagement, such as both having both text and audio, which we do also on the Inclusive Teacher, and avoiding click here for hyperlinks, instead naming where the links actually go. Next slide, please. And a couple of quick examples of how this accessibility guide informs the inclusive teacher course. So first with the use of colors, you can see here in these images how differently color can be perceived. And for this reason, we encourage teachers to use, for example, solid and dotted lines on a graph to make distinctions clear rather than, for example, red and green lines. And next slide, please. And another approach, which is in line with UDL as well as in our advice materials, is thinking about the ways in which text and information are structured and communicated. And we developed this example ourselves, so it's a bit egregious in the paragraph, but rather than blocks of text as on the left here, we emphasize the utility of headings, bullet points, etc., to enhance structure and clarity in delivering information. And this goes beyond course guides to everything else on the course and can extend to assigned readings, source materials, and more. And next slide.
Okay, so this was a sneak preview of what we offer in our course. We couldn't show you the course itself. If you want access, we can arrange access for external candidates. So you can just drop us an email at inclusiveteacher@rug.nl. So we're very willing to share. So thank you.
Thank you, Rina and Iain. As I told you before, please leave questions and comments in the chat so we can have a more panel-like discussion in the end of the presentations. I would now like to invite Rachel to get ready. Rachel Forsyth is a senior educational developer at Lund University in Sweden, and her work focuses on inclusive curriculum design, digital learning, and assessment strategies that promote equity and trust in higher education. Okay, Rachel, floor is yours.
Hello. Hi, yes, sorry, that was quite a long introduction I provided, sorry. Hello, and thank you all for coming today. We all had a bit of trouble getting in, I think, so congratulations for making it and having a very nice double first name, which is something I might like to catch on. I'm going to follow on really directly from this. Thank you so much to Rina and Iain there for a really lovely introduction, because I want to talk very specifically about how does generative AI impact on these kind of things. And I think that Rina and Iain gave a really good introduction of just things that we can start to think about, and they gave the message of one thing at a time, which I will also be sharing with you. But I want to think about what impacts the presence of generative AI might have on building an inclusive learning community. And by an inclusive learning community, I do mean one where the teacher and the students are kind of in a joint endeavour to get somewhere, which is hopefully for the students to find academic success in the course, or at least to explore the reasons why they might not get academic success. And so, as Rina said, there's many things that might go into students not feeling that they're in an inclusive learning community. So the most obvious one is the physical barriers, so the accessibility challenges, but as they said, there are many other things as well. And all of these things will impact on the contribution that a student can make in a class. And, you know, we would all recognise some of these things probably in our own working lives, things that affect the way that we can engage with different things that are happening around us. And of course, it's the same for students. They're not all the same, and they don't experience our classes all in the same way. But when you look at lists like this, it can feel a bit daunting, as we've already heard. It can feel a bit daunting and think you have to become an expert in everything. And of course, that's not true. We're not here to try to remove every individual barrier, more that a teacher's role in this scenario where we have diverse learners, which is the case in most Western European universities now. We're not trying to be prepared for everything that we might have to deal with, but what we want to do is to try to provide an environment where people feel that they matter in that classroom, that they are included, and that they can bring with them things that they know and have done in the past. So specifically thinking about that example of the student who said they were going to be leaving the Netherlands and going back somewhere else, and would they have the right skills? This is something that they could be raising in the classroom, in an inclusive classroom. But also other students would learn from that. So I think that was really well captured in the quote that we saw in the previous session. But if you're sitting here today, you're probably already thinking about these things, but you will know colleagues maybe who are not quite there yet. And it might be helpful to think about small ways that they can move forward with that. So it's a little bit scary to take my third point there, enabling students to be empowered. If students are empowered, the teacher has less power. And that can be something that people find a little bit difficult to think about. But the more you think about it, the more you probably will want to do it, because it means that you're going to be having more of a relationship of trust and adults in the classroom, where you can try to reduce barriers, but also learn from what students bring with them to the class. So you shouldn't always be thinking about it being a problem, a deficit. Students bring with them many experiences, knowledge that others might find useful. So thinking about that, this is another way of looking at it. UDL is exactly these things, but I'm just trying to summarise them in a slightly smaller slide. Having had the experience that Iain has, where showing UDL makes people sometimes sort of panic to begin with. So if you've got a course behind it, that's fine. If it's a short session like this, here are my 4 top tips. So we should be aware that students are different, and we'll come to this with different experiences and different prior knowledge and expectations. We should think a lot about what would make learning relevant and accessible. So why are we teaching this topic? Where does it fit into the course? Where does it fit into the whole programme and the rest of their future learning lives? Of course, it should be accessible. But then this thing about empowering the co-creation of knowledge. So if students have a trusting relationship with their teachers, they will bring to them questions and ideas that maybe aren't in the curriculum directly, that could be talked about in class, for example. But in any case, just making it possible for students to have a more open discussion with teachers is generally helpful to them. This is all from previous research we've done about trust between teachers and students, and also how students feel about having inclusive practices done to them. And then, of course, we should have the accessible to all. So I said I would talk about generative AI, which I will do now. If we take those 4 tips, which are just boiled down versions of what you will find in the Universal Design for Learning materials, which I highly recommend people have a look at. So if we take the first one, AI might give us some opportunities here. And using some of the example from the previous talk, we only have our own perspectives, and it's quite difficult to get other ones. We all live in our bubbles, information bubbles or opinion bubbles or whatever they are. It is possible to use a standardized generative AI chatbot like ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude, Gemini, to imagine that they are, let's say, a student in your class who comes from a different country and previously cared for their siblings. I don't know, you could also use AI to generate different perspectives, and get them to ask the chatbot, it's not a them, sorry, I mustn't personify it. Ask the chatbot to imagine what that student would do with that material, for example, or you can ask for different examples from different parts of the world that relate to your topics, depends what it is. But of course, this gives us challenges, because we also know that AI-generated content could have been trained on highly biased material, and might actually perpetuate some of the stereotypes and biases that we might be wanting to get rid of if we're truly committed to inclusive teaching. So there's just an example there. I'll just go through the other ones, not in quite so much detail, perhaps. If we want to think about co-creation of knowledge, again, this can be a bit challenging, but it really just means starting to ask questions about what students bring, what they think, how will they find out more. Peer review and discussion using the tools a little bit like in the previous example, but getting students to do it rather than teachers, can generate different perspectives that can be argued with, and provide examples for discussion in class. But something that many of us are worried about is that if we encourage students to rely too much on AI, they might actually do less of what we want here, which is discussion in class. So there's going to be a balance in every case of how we deal with this. Again, we can use this to generate learning activities, which could be fun and engaging in class, or maybe not. You probably need to try quite a few times to get the tone that suits your classes. I might personally go for something a bit flippant that I could carry off in class. You might want to be more serious. But of course, these tools again could encourage students to do those engaging activities by feeding them into a tool and just not learning anything and not even enjoying doing it either. And the last one, I think this is probably really important in the context of accessibility. Many students now, we're getting data from a lot of studies about how students use generative AI tools internationally. And many students, they say they use them to remove barriers for themselves. So I noticed that somebody had switched on a transcription tool in this Zoom, for example. That can be really important for people who have a visual impairment or who, who have hearing impairment in that particular case, or ADHD or dyslexia. There are lots of ways in which these tools can do that. So for dyslexia, for example, having a transcript which you get read out to you again might be useful if you miss something. But the challenge we've got here is that we may not always have access equally to AI tools. So somehow, along with everything else that we're expected to do, we've got to try to balance out these things a little bit. So I think we've got time for 2 minutes to just think about one way. You can just think, you can put something in the chat if you want to. I don't think we've got time to discuss, but we will have the panel afterwards. Think of one thing that you could try to make education a bit more inclusive in your own context, and then also think of a concern that you might have. I'm just going to be quiet for 2 minutes while you do that. Thank you, Tamsin. 2 minutes is an awfully long time in a webinar, isn't it? I'll let you keep thinking about it. What we found today is that I'm not capable of being quiet for 2 whole minutes, but it was a minute. And thank you for the examples that we're getting in, but feel free to add more because people will probably find that interesting. So I just wanted to round up this really short input by giving some suggestions for how you might move forward. Again, I'm assuming that you are here because you're already interested in these things. So you might want to talk to your colleagues about this. And I think it's important that people feel comfortable having an open discussion about generative AI. I talk to a lot of people about it at Lund University, and I meet people from the spectrum of this is the most fantastic thing, I'm going to use it in all my classes, to this is never going to come over through the door of my classroom, and that's fine, as long as we've had a discussion about why that is and what we feel about it. And I think if you can persuade people to be experimental, transparent, critical and honest, we'll find a balance of things that are good for us. And transparency is important because if we're hiding the fact that it gets used, or we're just ignoring the fact that students are using it and we're not really sure what they're doing, whether it's helping them or not in terms of inclusivity, we'll quickly get into a situation where teachers and students are not trusting each other at all in relation to this. If you're brave, you can talk to students about how to construct assessments and curriculum. Maybe generative AI can help with that, but doesn't have to. You can do it without generative AI. And make sure that you talk to students about the biases and the stereotyping that is definitely present in the outputs from these tools, which is a result of the fact that they've been trained on standardized materials, which include those biases. And that's something else you might want to have a discussion about in class. It's very dependent on your subject area, how strongly those things come up, but you will have a sense of it if you start thinking about it. So I'm going to just stop there. I just want to advertise a course as well, if that's okay. We've got a free MOOC, which is just an introduction and massive open online course, sorry, MOOC. It's just an introduction to generative AI for anybody who works in higher education. It's got a focus on how we use it. It's not technical. There are some technical ones around, but that's not it. So I'm going to stop there and I'm passing over to Matthew, because he's going to give you some really practical examples of how you might do some of these things.
Thank you ever so much, Rachel, for your presentation. And indeed, Matt is going to take the floor now. He's going to be talking to us about building digital accessibility tools with generative AI, so even more specific. And Matt is the Accessible Solutions Architect at the University of Southampton. He's been working in higher education for almost 25 years, mainly in the educational technology area. So now you know who Matt is. Please take the floor, Matt.
Thank you, Nicolette. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Deeprose, Accessible Solutions Architect at the University of Southampton. My topic for this afternoon is building digital accessibility tools with generative AI. And what do I mean by that? I mean prompting an LLM like Claude here, describing the tool that I want, then collaborating with it to build it. LLMs write code far faster than humans, and through careful prompting, testing and iteration, I've built useful tools we're already using or preparing to use to create more accessible educational resources. And in the past, I built tools myself, but I'm not a developer, so I spent evenings following guides and slowly creating small-scale tools. On the left is a page I made to show which university colours meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines for contrast. And on the right is a tool that randomly selects 4 brand colours, all with sufficient contrast, helping colleagues quickly browse accessible options until they find something they like. And I added colour vision deficiency simulation to this tool as well. The on-screen example shows those colours under protanopia simulation. And I appreciate this approach might not work well for everyone. It's worked for me because of my experience in educational technology, in IT, and I've built expertise in digital accessibility, so I know how to test whether a website is accessible, and I have plenty of ideas, and so far LLMs seem well suited to this. And I've been doing this for about a year. Before I started, I never imagined this would even be possible, and I find that learning what others are doing could help inspire new ideas. So I'll spend most of this presentation showing you tools I've built to give you an idea of what's possible and hopefully inspire you to build your own, covering tools of different sizes and scales across different subject areas. So that's the what and the why. And at the end, I'll point towards the how. I'll share a website with resources that you could try to get started. Now, this journey began when a colleague forwarded me a question from an embryology lecturer who prefers creating their own diagrams. They wanted to ensure their diagrams wouldn't create barriers for people with colour vision deficiency, or CVD. On screen is an example, a section of the developing embryo with ridges, green and pink, that will form the urogenital system. And 1 in 12 people of European ancestry will experience CVD. It predominantly affects men. And earlier work on making Power BI reports accessible had introduced me to CVD-safe palettes. And I found these in a helpful document by Alexandra Phillips at the National Centre for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And I'd also experimented, as we saw in the previous slide, with applying CVD simulation using the work of Nicholas Burrows. So I had an idea. I knew that the diagrams were vector-based and could be saved from our academics' original PowerPoint as SVG files, scalable vector graphics. So I thought, what if we had a tool where you could load your SVG file, see how it looks with different types of CVD, identify the colors used, swap them out with colors from a CVD-friendly palette, and then save the modified file. I presented the idea here as the life cycle of using the tool because that's how I structured the starting prompt that I used to make it, which you could find on my webpage. And I started with Microsoft Copilot, but then quickly moved into using Claude, which I found to be much better for this type of task. And after about 4 hours of iterating with Claude, I was ready to meet the academic to demonstrate the tool we built together. And I showed how to download the picture in SVG format from the PowerPoint he provided, upload it to the tool that I made, preview the image with different types of color vision deficiency, get a list of the colors used in the image, pick a CVD friendly palette and change out the colors in that image to one from the palette, preview how the change looked, then download that SVG file and load it back into the PowerPoint. And in this demo, I've just demonstrated the process, and since then I've done a lot of follow-up work to improve the tool. And while I said upload, I've designed these tools so that everything happens inside the browser as little as possible of the tools I demonstrate will they be using, sending any data outside of your computer. So now I'm going to show you a few small tools that I've made with the help of generative AI over the last year. First, very simple tool, took less than an hour to build with Gen AI. I discussed with colleagues that while few academics create their own diagrams, many use diagrams from other resources. So this is a simple CVD image tester where you can upload a bitmap image like a JPEG or a PNG. On screen is a photo of cooked mince shown with trichromatic, full color vision, and various types of CVD. I like this example. It illustrates something a colorblind colleague shared with me, the difficulty of checking when food is cooked. Next is a tool I built in the morning a few weeks ago. A colleague from our student disability and inclusion team had contacted me. They were supporting a student who had developed severe wrist pain, who wanted to use our Panopto lecture capture video captions to help write notes. But our setup doesn't let students download captions, and even if it did, timing information throughout would make them harder to use for that purpose. So I made a bookmarklet that you can drag into your browser bar. I have also a version which is friendly for those suffering from wrist pain who can't drag and drop. Allows you to generate a clean, timing-free transcript that they could then use for note-taking. And while it was beyond the original requirement, I included a Copilot prompt in the instructions to use to reformat those transcripts, adding headings, paragraphs, and bullet points to improve the transcript for readability. And I added a caveat that LLMs may not always do this reliably, but lately I found Copilot can usually manage this without issue. And since I built this bookmarklet a few weeks ago, knowing I was going to give this presentation and remembering the interest in example prompts from an earlier session, I've copied my entire LLM conversation and formatted it for readability. There's a link on the page that I'm sharing. It's unedited, but I thought it might interest you. So those are some examples of smaller discrete tools that I made. What about larger scale projects? So now I'm going to show some of those examples. The first project began when I came across Arizona State University's Image Accessibility Creator tool. It's a web page where you upload an image. Here I'm using a fairly low resolution diagram from one of our medicine modules. And the tool uses GPT-4o to write both a long description and shorter alternative text for people who can't see the image. And I was so impressed that I asked myself, could I do the same? And at the start of this year, I set myself a target to do so. And here's my version of an image description tool. Common criticism of LLM-generated image descriptions is they lack context for your specific purpose. So here, I've uploaded a graph from a first-year thermofluids module, and I added fields to set the topic, learning objective, description style, audience level, undergraduate or postgraduate, and other specific options. And then when the LLM uses those to help inform the description, and the description itself uses headings and formatting for easier reading. But more interesting was what I learned along the way, using AI to build tools that themselves use AI. And while experimenting with LLM outputs, I found them quite good at creating graphs in chart.js format. Here's an example. On the left, data produced by an LLM in JSON format, essentially a fancy CSV file. And on the right, my first attempt at rendering that, which is very plain. I wanted CVD-friendly graphs, so I returned to the CVD-friendly palettes from earlier. But I needed a background color with sufficient contrast, so that's a 3:1 ratio, against each color within a palette, which can contain between 5 and 9 different colors. So I worked with Claude to build a tool that finds single colors with sufficient contrast to every color within a palette. So here I've added the Okabe and Ito palette, and my tool, which I called Contrast Companion, finds 57 colors across 8 shades that meet the contrast requirement. And here's an example, a pie chart using the Okabe and Ito palette with pattern fills, so we don't rely on color alone to convey meaning. But that might remove one barrier for those with CVD, but what about those who cannot see the graphs at all? I really like the Described website, which offers instructions on writing alternative text for educational images, including graphs. And describing a graph requires short alternative text, but also a longer description covering the chart's structure, axes, a summary of the path through the labeled elements, and a list of data points, or ideally an accessible data table. And I realized that when we or an LLM creates chart.js graphs, we already have this information, like the graph type here is a bar chart, the title, the x-axis and the labels, and the y-axis. All the data needed for a description already exists. So I worked with Claude to programmatically describe chart.js graphs. This slide just lists some of the functions to give you an idea of what I was working on. And I used AI to create the algorithm, but now it's simply code that runs in your browser with no AI needed. And it walks through the data to build a description. So here's how it works for the end user. A button shows the description with the alt text, maximum 2 sentences, then the long description covering the graph structure, axes and data points, key insights, highest, lowest, average, pattern or distribution, complete list of data points, and a show data table button that produces an accessible and sortable data table. I'm now building a graph creator with point and click and CSV upload, so anyone can benefit from these techniques. So here is the tool in action, the full AI tool that I've been working on in the background. I've asked it to write a short piece about inflation's impact on modern economies. So it's going to produce its output first as Markdown and then accessible HTML. This includes a graphical timeline in Mermaid markup, for which I also wrote description functions with Claude's help, and a line graph with our CVD-friendly palette, varied line styles, and algorithmically generated description. Maths and STEM content is quite a challenge for digital accessibility. And LaTeX is a math typesetting system notoriously challenging to make accessible. And while programs exist to convert LaTeX to accessible HTML, none felt particularly intuitive to me. And here's a beta solution I've been working on. This demo is very much a work in progress. So we'll have LaTeX markup sitting on the left, rendered content on the right, along with syntax highlighting, a dark mode, but more importantly, buttons to export to HTML or a SCORM to upload to a learning environment like Blackboard. And the export offers a simple interface, a navigation bar for headings, distraction-free reading mode, and tools for font size, style, and setting the line height. The equations render using MathJax, which allows magnification and provides a really good level of compatibility with screen readers and refreshable braille displays. Another STEM challenge is handwritten content. On screen is a scanned solution sheet, inaccessible for anyone who can't see it and not machine readable, so you can't copy and paste. The standard solution is a tool called MathPix, and using their API is most cost effective, but you need to build software yourself to use it. So again, I worked with Claude to build a MathPix API wrapper. The API lets us use then only the European endpoint for GDPR compliance, ensures content's never used for training. And so far I've got image conversion, document conversion, handwritten content, and smartphone capture to work. Accuracy does vary, so I'm planning a feature to run MathPix output for an LLM to improve conversion accuracy. So to conclude, I've shown you tools I've built to demonstrate what's possible, but what about the how? So in my experience, building on existing tools and libraries works best, standing on the shoulders of giants. And you need to know what good looks like so you recognize a usable result when you get there. And while we can guide LLMs to create accessible web pages, we must test them ourselves. Accessibility knowledge is essential to benefit from this approach. And I recommend smaller scale projects without authentication or databases. This reduces security risks. And I tried to design all of my tools to run locally so data stays on our computer. Not always possible when you're using external APIs, but generally I try to avoid servers and let as much as possible run on the user's own device. So I've created a web page with my slides and resources to help you get started. And what's on there is links to all of the tools that I've demonstrated, a system prompt that I've crafted from years' experience of building accessibility tools with LLMs, with commentary explaining it. And as mentioned, I've shared the full Panopto text conversion and an example prompt to create a color accessibility matrix. LLMs rarely achieve sufficient color contrast in my experience, so I provided a starter CSS file, which isn't perfect, but should help to get you started if you're interested. So that's it. I hope you found at least something from this of interest. In my slide deck, there's a few hidden slides I didn't have time to show, but that's it from me. Back to you, Nicolette. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing those numerous tools that you've built. Let me just wrap things up. We've now been listening to 3 different presentations from a more general overview of what the inclusive teacher is, the tool itself, the course itself, and what you can do yourselves, to Rachel's general AI's impact on inclusive learning communities, to even more hands-on things like building your own accessibility generative AI tools. I think I saw in your presentations one common denominator, and that was do it yourself. The message I took home from your presentations was that you shared the links and you shared some other links that you talked about, and the message was try it for yourself, see what works, and I like that. It's very open and sharing. Let's see if I go through the chats to see what questions came up. Most of them have been answered, actually, which is really nice. Considered applying Creative Commons open license to the digital accessibility guidelines. That would be good, and we have gotten a link to that. Then there are some examples. Tamsin, for example, said that I've seen generative AI used to create culturally specific scenarios to be used for teaching with students at King's College. Rachel replied to that as well. Adjustment of graphics for color palette for visual impairment. We've seen how that works for maths. And as I said, links to download presentations and other things as well. So I would like to invite you to put some more questions in the chat. And if there aren't any more questions with 4 minutes to go, I would like you... Klaus-Jürgen, what version of LLM do you use for the tools? I think it's a question to Matt.
I use Claude. Currently, I'm using the Opus 4.5 model. I've tried other models, but I always go back to Claude. For me, it just is most reliable at achieving what I'm after. But of course, that's a commercial tool which has a cost. So what you have available within your institution and so on might affect what you need to do. We don't have Claude at our institution. I'm using my own personal license to make this, but maybe what I'd just add in while I'm still talking is when I'm creating these tools, I'm using semantic HTML, vanilla JavaScript, and CSS. Mainly to enable them to be as maintainable going forwards as possible, which could be by developers or potentially with other LLMs. So I'm trying not to build in any dependencies that would make it harder to use. And everything that I've put on on my site, that's kind of in a finished state. I almost always will add a Creative Commons with attribution there. So anyone's welcome to then take it and take their own spin on it. Thank you. Back to you, Nicolette.
Thank you. Just to remind everything in the room, the recordings and the presentations will be shared on the event page for this event. Also, if you have any questions or any presentations you would like to hold within the Media and Learning Association, please contact us, or if you would like to contribute to our newsletter. There are some upcoming events as well, which you can check in on our webpage. And also you see them currently on the slide that Shirin is sharing. When you close the current Zoom meeting, a survey will pop up, and we would really like you to fill it out because we want to know what you think and how we can improve ourselves as well. With that said, thank you all for joining, and we'll hope to see you in our next event.